The first time I lied for Dylan, I didn't even think of it as a lie. It was a Tuesday. The kind of Tuesday that feels like it was designed specifically to exhaust you, gray sky. Lukewarm coffee, a history quiz I hadn't studied for. I was 17, a junior at Westbrook High, and the only thing I genuinely cared about that morning was getting through the day without drawing attention to myself. That was my whole strategy for survival back then. Be quiet. Be invisible. Don't give anyone a reason to notice you. Dylan Carter noticed me anyway. He sat 2 rows behind me which was the last period of the day, the class where everyone's brain had already checked out and was halfway home. Dylan was the kind of guy who existed in a different social atmosphere than me, not necessarily popular in the loud, obnoxious way, but noticeable. He was tall, had dark curly hair that he never seemed to bother styling, and he laughed at things that other people didn't find funny. He was on the swim team, not because he was obsessed with athletics, but because, as I would later learn, the pool was the only place where he felt genuinely free. I had never really spoken to Dylan before that Tuesday. Mr. Flanagan had a strict policy about phones. If he saw one, he took it for the week. Not the period, the week. It was the kind of rule that felt unconstitutional to every student in the building. But Mr. Flanagan was also the kind of teacher who could make the American Revolution feel like a thriller novel. So everyone tolerated his tyranny with the phones. I heard the buzz before Mr. Flanagan did. The desk behind me vibrated with a notification, and I instinctively turned around, the way you do when a sound breaks silence. Dylan's eyes went wide. His phone was sitting on the corner of his desk, lit up with a message, and Mr. Flanagan was already turning away from the board. I don't know why I did it. My hand moved before my brain caught up. I reached back, grabbed the phone off Dylan's desk in one motion, slid it under my thigh, just as Mr. Flanagan's eyes swept our section of the room. Something happening back there? Mr. Flanagan asked. Sorry, I said. I dropped my pen. Mr. Flanagan looked at me for a second that lasted approximately 11 years, and then turned back to the board. I felt Dylan's exhale on the back of my neck. After class, he caught up with me in the hallway, slightly breathless, backpack half hanging off one shoulder. He held his hand out, and I dropped the phone into his palm. That was he started. Don't worry about it, I said, and kept walking. He fell into step beside me. Hey, I'm serious. Flanagan would have taken it for the whole week. I needed that phone tonight. Okay, I said, not sure what he wanted me to do with that information. I'm Dylan, he said. I know who you are. He seemed surprised by that, which surprised me. Did he think he was invisible? You're Marcus, he said. Marcus Webb. Yeah, thank you, Marcus Webb. I nodded and turned toward the staircase that led to the east exit. He stopped at the top of the stairs, and I thought that was the end of it. A small, strange moment that would fade into the background of the school year like everything else. But he said one more thing before I got to the first step. Hey, I owe you. I didn't turn around. You don't, I said, and walked down the stairs. I thought about that moment more than I should have that night. Not in a dramatic way. Just the small, repeating way that certain moments circle back to you, the phone warm in my hand, his breath on my neck, the way he'd said my full name like it meant. Something I told myself it was. Nothing. I was very good at telling myself things were nothing. The thing about growing up the way I grew up is that you develop a very specific skill set. You learn to read rooms. You learn to know within seconds of walking into a space whether it's safe or not. You learn to keep the parts of yourself that feel dangerous packed away neatly. Like documents in a filing cabinet you never open in public. My parents were not unkind people. I want to be clear about that. My dad, Gerald Webb, was a high school football coach who genuinely believed that hard work could fix anything. My mother, Diane, taught elementary school and made the best jollof rice in the county and cried at every single movie she watched, even ones that weren't sad. They loved me. I knew that, but love and understanding are not always the same thing. And I had known from approximately age 11 that there was a version of me they were not yet prepared to understand, so I kept that version filed away. I got decent grades. I stayed out of trouble. I had a small group of friends, Toby, who was obsessed with graphic novels, and Priya, who wanted to be a marine biologist and therefore knew a disturbing amount about deep-sea creatures. We ate lunch together and watched movies on weekends, and it was, by most measures, a normal life. It just wasn't a complete one. Dylan Carter started showing up at the edges of my life. After the phone incident in small consistent ways that I tried very hard not to track. He nodded at me in the hallway. He saved me a seat in history class once when I came in late, and every other seat near the back was taken. He asked to borrow a pen, and then returned it the next day with a sticky note that said "Still works, confirmed." I didn't laugh at that, but I wanted to. 3 weeks after the phone incident, he sat down across from me in the library. I was doing calculus homework, which I found soothing in the way that problems with definite answers can be soothing when the rest of your life feels indefinite. He dropped his backpack on the chair beside him and opened a textbook without asking if the seat was taken. It should have been annoying, but somehow wasn't. We worked in silence for about 15 minutes. I finished a problem. He chewed on his pen cap. Outside the library windows, the swim team was doing drills in the outdoor pool, their bodies cutting through the water with that particular efficiency that athletic training produces. "You ever swim?" he asked. I looked up. He was watching the pool too, not competitively, I said. "You should come to a practice sometime," he said. "Coach lets people watch. We're not that interesting, but the offer stands." "Why?" He turned from the window and looked at me. He had these dark brown eyes that processed things slowly and carefully, like he was actually thinking about what he was looking at instead of just seeing it. "Because you seem like someone who doesn't get out of his own head very often," he said. "And watching other people do a repetitive physical task is surprisingly good for that." I stared at him. "That's a very specific prescription. I'm a very specific person," he said, and went back to his textbook. I did not go to swim practice, but I thought about it. November arrived with the particular aggression that November has in the Northeast bare trees. Iron-colored sky, the kind of cold that gets into the building despite the heating system's best efforts. The school hallways smelled like wet jackets and cafeteria soup. I was at my locker on a Friday afternoon when I heard it. 2 seniors. Guys from the football team named Connor and Brett, who I had always categorized as low-level threats and given wide berth. They were standing near the water fountain, not bothering to lower their voices. Because guys like Connor and Brett had never needed to lower their voices about anything. "You see Carter at Thompson's party last weekend?" "Yeah, weird. Super weird." "I'm telling you, nah, come on, Carter. I'm just saying what I saw. I didn't know what they'd seen. I didn't want to know." I closed my locker quietly and walked away in the other direction, the conversation dropping behind me like a stone into water, but the ripples followed me that night. I lay on my bed staring at the ceiling and thought about Dylan Carter, about the way he'd looked at me in the library, about the pen note, about IOU, about the things I kept in a filing cabinet and never opened in public. I made a deal with myself. They're on the ceiling. I would stop noticing things. I was going to be focused and strategic and intentional about my invisibility. And I was not going to let a curly-haired swimmer with careful eyes disrupt the system. I had spent years perfecting. On Monday, Dylan sat next to me in history class, not behind me. Next to me, in the seat that was usually occupied by a girl named Sarah, who was apparently absent, and slid a folded piece of paper onto my desk. Without looking at me, I looked at it for a full 30 seconds. Before opening it, "Do you want to get food after school? The taco truck on Elm stays open until 6. Below it, in smaller writing, you don't have to." I'm just asking, that last line. I'm just asking. Something about the simplicity of it, the complete lack of pressure, made my chest feel strange. I wrote okay on the bottom of the paper and slid it back. He didn't look at it until after class. When he did, he smiled at his desk, and I was already looking away. But I saw it anyway. The taco truck on Elm was the kind of institution that exists in every mid-sized, con-American town, slightly battered. Cash only, run by a family who had been there so long they were part of the neighborhood's geography. We stood at the window and ordered and then sat on the low stone wall across the sidewalk, watching traffic. eating in that comfortable silence that usually takes much longer to develop between two people who don't know each other well. "Why did you grab my phone?" he asked eventually. "I already told you. Don't worry about it." "Yeah, but that's not an answer. You don't even know me. You risked getting your own phone taken. I didn't have my phone out. You risked getting in trouble then?" I chewed my taco thoughtfully. Flanagan was about to see it. It seemed easier to just deal with it. "Easier," he repeated, like he was testing the word. "That's an interesting way to describe it. What would you call it?" He looked at me sidelong. "Kind," he said. "I'd call it kind." I didn't know what to do with that, so I ate my taco. "I have a question," he said, "and you don't have to answer it." Something tightened in my chest. "Okay? Are you happy?" I turned and looked at him. "What kind of question is that?" "Honest one." The cars went by. Someone's radio was playing something I didn't recognize. The cold had eased up a little, the way it sometimes does in November, like the season is having second thoughts. "I'm fine," I said. "That's not the same thing. I know." He nodded slowly, like he'd expected that answer, and finished his food. He didn't push. He didn't try to peel anything open or excavate anything. He just nodded and let it sit there between us, not as an accusation or a challenge, just as something true that had been acknowledged. I thought, this person is dangerous, I thought. Not in the way I'm used to dangerous being. We walked back to the school parking lot together because he'd driven and offered me a ride. His car was an old Subaru that had clearly survived several winters, with a pine tree air freshener and a collection of swim meet ribbons hanging from the rearview mirror. "You keep those up there?" I asked. "My mom put them there," he said. "I keep trying to take them down, but she adds more every season." Something about that image, his mom cheerfully decorating his car with ribbons while he tried to maintain. His detached coolness made me laugh. Actually laugh. Not the polite almost laugh I deployed in social situations, but a real one that surprised me by coming out. Dylan glanced over from the driver's seat, and he was smiling. Not a big smile. Just a quiet, satisfied one, like something he'd been waiting for had finally shown up. "There it is," he said. "There what is. Your real laugh." I looked out the window. "You don't know what my real laugh sounds like." "I do now," he said. He dropped me off at my house. I went inside. I stood in the entryway for a long moment before my mother called from the kitchen asking if I wanted dinner. And I said yes, and the evening folded back into the ordinary shape it always had. But something had shifted. I could feel it the way you feel a change in air pressure, not dramatic. Not visible, but undeniably real. December came, and with it the organized chaos of semester finals, holiday concerts, and the particular social frenzy that overtakes high schools in the last weeks before winter break. Dylan and I had fallen into something that didn't have a clear name yet. We ate lunch together sometimes. We texted briefly in the economical way that felt characteristic of both of us. He sent me swim meet times, not pressuring me to come, but making. Sure, I knew. I went to one. I stood in the upper section of the natatorium with my hands in my jacket pockets and watched him cut through the water with that particular focused efficiency. And I thought, I am in a problem I created for myself, and I'm not sure I want to solve it. He saw me afterward. When I was making my way out through the lower corridor, his hair was still damp, a towel around his shoulders, talking to a teammate. He spotted me across the crowd and his face did something lit up, is too strong a description. But there was a quality of brightening, something that came from somewhere genuine, and he held up one finger like, wait. I waited. He jogged over, his teammate watching with some curiosity. You came, he said. You gave me the schedule. Lots of people have the schedule. You came. He was still slightly out of breath from the race. Up close like this, damp-haired and flushed and speaking with simple directness. He was I. Made myself stop that train of thought. You were fast, I said. Second place. Second is fast. Second is not first, he said, but he was still smiling. I'm glad you came, Marcus. Said goodnight, and walked out into the cold December air and stood on the sidewalk and breathed. Second is not first. I'm glad you came. The filing cabinet in my chest was developing structural problems. The conversation that changed things happened 3 days before winter break. We were in his car again, parked outside the library because I'd needed to return books and he'd needed to kill time before his ride-home situation resolved itself. The heat was running. Snow was coming down in the early dark December way that makes parking lots feel like they exist outside of normal time. We'd been talking about the usual things: finals, Christmas plans, whether Mr. Flanagan would give the class a break on the exam, and then a silence had fallen. And the silence had a different quality than our usual comfortable quiet. It had weight to it. Dylan was looking at the snow. "Can I tell you something?" He said, "Yeah, you can react however you react. I don't have any particular expectation." My heart was doing something very loud. "Okay," I said. "I think you probably already know," he said. "I think you're smart enough that you've likely already figured it out. And the reason I haven't said anything directly is because I wasn't sure if that would make things weird, or if you'd want to deal with that." Or he stopped, restarted. "I think it's better to just say things clearly. I'm better at clear." "Okay," I said again. He turned from the windshield and looked at me. "I'm gay," he said. "I've been out to a few people for about a year. My parents know. A couple of friends know. It's not a secret exactly, but I'm also not broadcasting it, because this town is what it is." He paused. "And I wanted you to know because I think you keep a lot of things at a distance. And I don't want you to feel like you have to do that with me." Snow came down. I sat there with the heater blowing and the ribbons swaying slightly from the rearview mirror, and the most careful eyes I'd ever seen watching me, waiting without any particular urgency. I mean, not that you were out, just that I stopped, started over. I had a sense of things. He nodded slowly. "From the filing cabinet. The years of keeping it closed. My father coaching football, and my mother crying at movies and loving me completely, and not yet understanding everything about who I was. Priya and Toby, who knew almost everything but not that. The careful, invisible strategy. The long game of being safe. I've never said it out loud," I said, and my voice was not entirely steady. "To anyone." Dylan did not move closer. He did not reach for my hand or make any dramatic gesture. He just sat there, present and still, and said, "You don't have to say it right now." "No," I said. I think I looked at the snow. "I think I want to." I said it. 3 words. Words I had lived with for years in a locked room inside myself. I said them quietly, barely above the sound of the heater, to a boy I'd known for less than 3 months. In an old Subaru in a library parking lot with December snow on the windshield, and the world did not end. The car was the same car. The snow was the same snow. I was slightly lighter, actually. Like I'd been carrying something at a slight lean for so long I'd forgotten about the tilt. And now I was standing straight. "Thank you," Dylan said. Simple, clean. Not making it bigger than it needed to be. For what? For trusting me with that? We sat there for another 20 minutes, talking about other things, normal things, easy things, and when I got out of the car and walked home through the first real snow of the season, I kept waiting to feel panicked or exposed or regretful. I felt instead a strange and fragile sense of relief. Winter break came and went. My family drove to Philadelphia to visit my aunt, and I spent the holiday in the warmth of extended family in a way that was both completely loving and slightly suffocating. The way holidays can be. I texted Dylan sporadically. He texted back. We talked about nothing important, and it felt important anyway. I came back to school in January, a degree warmer toward the world. The next weeks found us in a pattern that was, from the outside, completely ordinary. We walked to class together sometimes. We drove to the taco truck in weather that required the heat on maximum. We had conversations that ranged from the completely mundane to things I'd never said to another person. About what it was like to feel like you were acting in a performance of your own life. About the specific weight of keeping things in. About what we each wanted the future to look like. He told me about his first understanding of himself. At 13, how he'd sat with it alone for 2 years before telling anyone. He told me about coming out to his parents. His mother had cried and then hugged him so hard, it thought a rib might be involved. His father had been quiet for a week, and then came to Dylan's room one night and said he was sorry it had taken him a week, and that he loved him. And that was that. I told him about being 11 years old and knowing something about myself before I had language for it, and the years of careful, invisible strategy that followed. "You're exhausted," he said once. "What?" "From carrying it. It's tiring, keeping things hidden. You look tired in a specific way." "I'm fine." "I know you're fine," he said. "Fine and tired can coexist. You don't have to be not fine for it to be a lot." That was Dylan. He found language for things that I had always left wordless. Not because I was bad with words, but because I'd convinced myself the wordless things were safer next. It was Priya who noticed first. We were at her house on a Saturday in February, the three of us, me, Priya, Toby eating chips and watching a nature documentary about something deep sea that Priya had been pushing for weeks. Toby had fallen asleep 20 minutes in, which was a betrayal Priya had catalogued, but not yet addressed. I was mostly watching my phone. "Who are you texting?" Priya asked. "No one." "You've smiled at your phone 4 times in the last half hour." "No, I haven't." "Toby, has Marcus smiled at his phone 4 times in the last half hour?" Said Toby, who was asleep. "The witness is compromised," I said. Priya pulled her knees to her chest and looked at me with the expression she made when she was going to say something that required courage. She was one of my best friends, and I loved her, and she was also occasionally terrifying. "Is it Dylan Carter?" she said. My ears went warm. "We're friends. You can be friends with someone and also have feelings about them." "Priya, I'm not pushing," she said very gently. "I promise I'm not pushing. I just want you to know that I see you. Whatever is happening or not happening, I see you and I love you, and I'm not going anywhere." Wow. I looked at the television, where something bioluminescent was doing something extraordinary in the deep dark of the ocean. "I know," I said. "Okay," she said. Good. She didn't ask anything else. That was Priya. She left doors open and never forced them. That night, driving home, I thought about what she'd said. "I see you." How long I'd worked to prevent exactly that. How strange it was that being seen by the right people felt like warmth instead of exposure. I texted Dylan when I got home. "Nothing significant. Just Priya asked about you." He responded in 30 seconds. "What did you tell her? That we're friends?" A pause. "Then, is that what we are?" I stared at my phone. "I don't know what we are," I typed. Another pause. "Longer then. I'd like to figure that out." "If you want to." I sat on my bed in the dark of my room with my phone in my hand, and the filing cabinet in my chest swung open. I thought, okay, me too, I wrote. What followed was not a movie montage. It was not sudden and cinematic and perfect. It was 2 people who were both careful and a little afraid, moving slowly towards something they both wanted but had learned to approach with caution. We started doing things that had a different quality than before. Walks after school that went longer than they needed to. A study session at his house, where I met his mom. A warm, compact woman named Rita, who fed me enough food for 4 people, and asked me questions with genuine interest and treated me with the easy warmth of someone who had raised a kind son and recognized what kindness looked like. When it walked in the door, I met his father, Robert, who was a structural engineer and communicated primarily through project updates and facts, but occasionally looked up from whatever he was reading and asked thoughtful questions that suggested he'd been paying close attention all along. "Your parents seem really—" I tried to find the right word on the drive home. "Comfortable," Dylan offered. "Yeah, with everything." "It took time," he said. "My dad especially needed time. But yeah. Now, yeah." That's I looked out the window. "That must be a good feeling." He was quiet for a moment. "You'll get there," he said. "With yours. If and when you're ready. You don't know my parents." "I know you," he said. "And I know you're carrying something you don't have to carry alone." The first time he held my hand was not planned and not dramatic. It was March. A cold but clear night. and we were walking back from the late showing of some action movie that had been much more enjoyable than many of us expected. The theater was in the next town over, which had just enough distance from Westbrook to feel slightly anonymous. The parking lot was mostly empty by the time we came out. The night sky doing that thing in early spring where it's completely clear, and you can see more stars than you expect. We were walking to his car, talking about something the movie, probably. Something about the plot logic, and he stopped walking. I stopped because he stopped. He looked at the sky for a moment. Then he looked at me, and he reached over and took my hand. Quietly. Simply. The way you do something you've been considering for a while, and have finally decided to just do. I looked at our hands. His hand around mine in the cold March air. I didn't pull away. I didn't calculate or strategize or perform a risk assessment. I just stood there in the parking lot with the stars above, and something that felt whole and new and terrifying and safe all at once blooming quietly in my chest. Okay, he said. Yeah, I said. Okay? We walked to his car holding hands, and the parking lot was empty, and the night was clear. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I was not managing my visibility. I was just there. Telling Priya was easier than I expected. I told her on a Sunday in April. Walking around the park near her house, hands in pockets, circling the pond, I just said it. Both things. The thing about myself, I'd never said aloud to anyone except Dylan. And the thing about Dylan and me, whatever Dylan and me was becoming. She didn't make it a big event. She stopped walking, looked at me for a moment, with a kind of expression that holds a lot of complicated love in it, and then said, "Thank you for telling me." And then, "Are you happy?" Same question Dylan had asked in October, on a stone wall outside the taco truck. This time my answer was different. Yeah, I said. I think I actually am. She was not a frequent hugger. It meant something when Priya Webb decided to deploy one. I hugged her back, and we stood by the pond for a moment in the April wind, and then she said, "Do I get to interrogate him, or is that too much?" Absolutely too much. A light interrogation. 10 questions? Maybe 15? No, 5. I'll do it warmly. Fine. I'll be normal. No promises on the questions, though. Telling Toby was even easier. He looked up from his graphic novel, processed the information, said, "Dylan Carter, swim team." I confirmed. He went back to his graphic novel and said, "Good," like I'd told him we decided on a restaurant. And that was more or less that. I loved my friends. Spring came the way spring always comes after a long northeast winter, with a kind of staggering abundance that feels almost apologetic for the preceding months. Everything green, everything in motion, the swim season ending and the final stretch of junior year beginning. Dylan and I we hadn't put an exact label on it. In the way that 17-year-olds sometimes avoid labels because the thing feels bigger than what the label can hold, we were together. We were in each other's days in a way that had become as natural as breathing. He knew how I took my coffee and which problems I worked out by going quiet versus which ones I worked out by talking through them. I knew that he got anxious the night before big races, and that the only useful thing to do was sit with him without trying to fix it, and that he made the best playlists but refused to accept compliments about them, and that he'd been drawing architectural sketches in notebooks since he was 12 and had not told anyone except me. I had told my parents. That is its own story within this story, and it deserves its proper weight, so I'll give it that. It was a Sunday in May. My father was watching a baseball game with the loose per-Sunday attention he gave it when there was nothing at stake. My mother was in the kitchen doing the weekend cooking, something simmering on the stove. The house smelled like home in the particular way it always had. I sat down next to my dad on the couch. I had prepared nothing. No speech. Dylan had offered to help me plan something, and I'd said no, because I knew that if I planned it, I'd either execute it perfectly and feel like I'd been giving a presentation, or I'd overthink it and never do it at all. "Dad," I said, "I need to tell you something." He muted the game. That alone, just the act of muting it. Turning to face me fully made my throat tight. I called my mom in from the kitchen. She came in, drying her hands on a dish towel, reading my face with that particular maternal precision that detects atmospheric changes in a child before they've fully formed. She sat in the armchair across from us. I said it. The same 3 words I'd said to Dylan in the library parking lot in December, that I'd said quietly to Priya in April. 3 words that were mine, that had always been mine, that I had kept in a closed drawer for 6 years. My mother's hands went still on the dish towel. My father looked at the muted television for a moment. Just a moment. Then back at me. The next few minutes were complicated. My mother cried, which she later told me had nothing to do with anything except that she'd understood in that moment that I had been carrying something heavy for a long time by myself, and it hurt her that I'd felt I had to do that. My father was quiet in the way Dylan had told me. His own father was quiet, not absent, just processing. He asked a few careful questions. Not the wrong kind of questions. The kind that meant he was trying to understand, not judge. By the end of the conversation, nothing had been perfectly resolved. Real life doesn't work like that. But my mother had reached across and held both my hands, and my father had said, "I love you, Marcus." That's the whole of it right there. And those words had gone into me and taken up residence. I called Dylan from my room that night. "How are you feeling?" He asked. "Scared," I said honestly. "Relieved. Kind of empty, in a good way. Like I put something heavy down." "That's exactly what it is," he said. "You put something down." My dad said, "I love you, Marcus." That's the whole of it. There was a brief pause. "That's a really good dad thing to say," Dylan said. I said, "It really is." We finished junior year. Senior year started in September and had the particular quality that final years have a kind of hyper-awareness of everything. Knowing that the current version of your life has an expiration date, and that expiration dates, even when they lead to good things, are still ends. College applications in November, decisions to make about futures. Dylan had been accepted early decision to a school in Boston that had a strong architecture program. He'd told me at the taco truck, hands wrapped around a coffee, because October had arrived. His voice doing a careful thing that meant he was managing the magnitude of something. I was looking at schools in New York and Philadelphia, which were not Boston. We had that conversation. It was not a fun conversation. We had it at his house, in his room, on a November Saturday when the trees had gone full rust and gold outside his window. And we said the things that needed to be said about the future and what it might look like. And neither of us pretended it was simple. "We don't have to solve this right now," he said. "But I want to know how you're thinking about it." He was quiet. He looked at the architectural sketches pinned on his bulletin board, buildings he'd drawn in notebooks since 12. Now, more detailed, more structured. "I think we're both going to go where we need to go," he said. "And I think whatever is between us is real enough that we figure out the rest as we go." "That's not a plan," I said. "No," he agreed. "It's a commitment." I looked at him. He met my eyes with that careful, unhurried attention. "Okay," I said. "Yeah, okay. The last thing I want to tell? You is a small thing. Graduation day. June. The high school football. Field with folding chairs and a podium, and the marching band. Playing something that was trying its best. Every family in the county sitting in the bleachers in the sunshine. After the ceremony, in the general chaos of photographs and congratulations and people crying with varying degrees of sincerity, my mother took approximately 40 photographs. My father shook my hand and then pulled me into a hug, the kind of hug that said more than words, and then, a little ways across the field, Dylan was with his family, his mother already mid-cry. His father standing at his shoulder with a hand on his back. He saw me over the crowd and raised a hand, and I raised mine back. My mother noticed she had, it turned out, noticed several things over the past year. She had done what good mothers do, which is pay attention and wait and not push. And when I'd come to her and my father in May, she had not been surprised. Only sad that I'd carried it so long, and then incrementally. Patiently, she had rebuilt her understanding of my life to include the whole of it. "Is that him?" she asked quietly beside me. "Yeah," I said. That's him. She looked across the field. He has a good face, she said, Mom. I'm being objective. He looks kind, she said simply. He looks like someone who would be kind to you. I looked across the field at Dylan Carter, who was laughing now at something his mother was saying, who had once said, "Are you happy?" to a boy he barely knew because he thought it was worth asking, who had reached for my hand in an empty parking lot under a clear March sky, who had sat with me in his car while I said 3 words for the first time and had not made it more than it needed to be and had not made it less than it was. He is. He really is. My mother made a small sound that I recognized as the precursor to one of her crying at things moments, and I put my arm around her before it could escalate, and we stood there in the June sunshine. And across the field, Dylan caught my eye again, and this time he smiled, that quiet, real one I'd first seen in history. Class, when he'd read my okay off the bottom of a folded piece of paper, I smiled back, and that was all. That was everything. Sometimes the whole story of something is just this. A person saw you, and you let yourself be seen, and neither of you looked away.